So welcome to the League of Women Voters of Virginia Legislative Roundtable. We're happy to have you with us this morning, and this is our lobby day. So welcome. We hope that you have meetings with your legislators this morning, and we're happy to have people in the room with us as well. And I think we're going to have a great day. We have a great lineup of speakers. And I'll just go ahead and throw it over to Nicole Porter. She is the State and Local Advocacy Director for the Sentencing Project. Welcome, Nicole.
Good morning, and thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful. It's always wonderful to join the League. So yeah, I am the Senior Director of Advocacy at the Sentencing Project. I've been here a long time, and I was invited to talk with you all about voting rights and rights restoration for people with felony conviction histories. Specifically, I know that that's been a priority of the Virginia League, and I'm so happy to be able to join you all this morning to discuss it. The Sentencing Project has been working on that since the late 90s, when we helped pioneer the state estimates on the number of people directly impacted by felony disenfranchisement, and we published national reports regarding that, including the estimates for Virginia. Currently, we are working in state campaigns in Kentucky, Connecticut, Tennessee, New York, on a range of issues all around expanding voting rights to people with felony conviction histories. In New York and Connecticut, there are emerging campaigns to actually end felony disenfranchisement outright, to allow people in prison the right to vote, which we think is an important next step in challenging felony disenfranchisement, and is also a counter to the political efforts happening around the country actively working to suppress the vote. So how, what a wonderful way to counter voter suppression than to work actively to expand the franchise to new constituencies and new voters, including people who are in prison. And as I'm sure you all know, 2 states never denied people the right to vote, those states of Maine and Vermont. The territory of Puerto Rico expanded voting rights to people in prison in the mid-'80s. And in 2020, the District of Columbia ended felony disenfranchisement, allowing people the right to vote in prison, including with felonies, including folks who are in custody in the district, the DC jail in the district, but DC does not have a prison. As many of you know, when Lorton Reformatory closed in the late 90s, that meant that there was no local prison in the immediate DC area. And so persons sentenced to felonies longer than a year in DC are actually sent into the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which makes the effort around implementing rights restoration for imprisoned voters in prison from DC, given that they are in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, some as far away as Texas and California, very challenging, but it's work that a continued coalition is working on implementing and figuring out ways to guarantee access to the ballot for imprisoned voters from the district. And that is supported by an executive order that President Biden issued last spring. So there's efforts to, and that executive order covered a range of voting rights protections, including strengthening protections and practices for eligible voters in federal custody. So the DC coalition is working to implement that, is working with the authority of that executive order to implement it. And it's with all of that that we hope, if successful, that there's more states that can seriously consider ending felony disenfranchisement outright and expanding the franchise to this very incredibly marginalized constituency, all in the context of trying to counter voter suppression with active efforts to expand the franchise. I know in Virginia, that has been a serious part of the conversation there. And then this year, you all are actively working on rights restoration, towards the constitutional amendment, building off of the years of work around governor's executive orders and works to do rights restoration, but obviously the Constitution in Virginia needs to change. That is also true in Kentucky, where there's where an active coalition, also led by the Kentucky League of Women Voters, is working to get in legislation introduced that would ultimately end up on the ballot for a constitutional amendment there as well. So Virginia and Kentucky, you all are, doing the good work built on years of advocacy and, community education to try to change the Constitution and end this ban on voting for people after they completed their sentence in lifetime disenfranchisement. So it's incredibly important, and Sentencing Project is grateful for that. And we, stand as a national organization looking to support and working to help amplify the efforts to change the Constitution and end this ban on voting. There's other efforts too around the country. Last year, rights were restored through statutory changes in New York, Washington State, and also Connecticut. All of those states ended felony disenfranchisement for people in the community on probation or parole. So there have been reforms. There are pending bills this year in Oregon, Illinois, New York, all around ending felony disenfranchisement. So allowing people in prison with felony convictions the right to vote. So there continue to be reforms, and we know that in Virginia is right on that list. So when I go to other conversations, I mention the work that you all are doing in Virginia, and look forward to staying engaged and looking forward to the developments this session. So I'll stop there. And if there's any questions or feedback, I'd love to, engage with you all. And then I can offer some additional context if that would be helpful as well. But I just wanted to pause to see if there's any questions or reactions.
There are a couple of comments about DC statehood connected to this. And if you can talk a little bit more about the correlation. And there's also a question about, is this a partisan issue?
Well, I'll take the partisan issue first. I am not affiliated with any party, and the Sentencing Project is a nonpartisan organization. And in many ways, the right to vote should be fundamental to citizenship and ensuring the voices of the electorate, even though the founders of this country did not think that everybody in this, in this land should be able to vote. History and time has shifted what the responsibility is of the citizen and of the resident is to the state, to government. And so despite the framers and the founders of this country's opinion about who should have a stake in governing, there is consensus now that every citizen should have a right to vote. So this is not a partisan issue. Who has a voice in governing should be beyond politics and shouldn't be about just allowing people the right to vote because they will vote for a particular party or not. Sorry, I'm like tearing up. It's not an emotional reaction. It's just for whatever reason. I think I have allergy, maybe it's some sort of allergy reaction right now. So I hope that answers your question from my perspective. I know people try to make it partisan, but Sentencing Project is a nonpartisan organization, so we're not affiliated with any political party, and the fundamental right to vote should be beyond political party association. Now, in addition to statehood, I'm not an expert on statehood. I do think that the fact that now DC has expanded the franchise to literally marginalized citizens, even those who are not physically in the district, really expands the perception of who has a right in governing and who should have that right in governing, given their interest in the city, given their interest in the district. So I hope that there is some connection. I hope that for statehood advocates, that they work with the reality that now imprisoned voters from DC can vote, that they connect with them. I know that the League of DC is doing a lot of work in educating imprisoned voters. They are launching a hotline and staffing that hotline with volunteer support to help educate imprisoned voters across the country. And they're doing other work, is particularly as we get closer to the primary in the summer, doing other work around making sure that eligible voters in felony custody from the District of Columbia are educated about the primary and who's on the ballot. Any other questions or reactions?
I don't see any, but they might drop in.
I will drop a resource in the chat from our voting rights page, and I invite everyone to take a look. Yeah, I'll also put my email in the chat and invite people to follow up with me if you have any questions.
Can you tell us what else the sentencing project does?
Absolutely. So we are a research and advocacy organization based in DC that's been around since the mid-1980s. We track criminal and legal policy, and we have three priority issue areas, one including voting rights. Another is extreme sentencing. So talking about length of prison terms and the growth of incarceration, particularly over the last 40 to 50 years, and the key drivers of mass incarceration. We know that we can't undo mass incarceration without undoing the extreme sentencing that dominates criminal legal policy. And in Virginia, there's an active agenda around that this year with revisiting some of the too long sentences and the fact that Virginia abolished parole in the mid-90s. And so the length of time served has increased in Virginia, and there's a need to revisit some of those practices in order to address the high rate of incarceration. And the third priority is youth justice. So we are working at raising the age of criminal jurisdiction, of juvenile justice jurisdiction in 3 states that are the last 3 states to raise the age of juvenile jurisdiction to 18, those states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Texas. And, working also to expand youth justice for at-risk youth, including stopping the automatic transfer of youth to the adult criminal legal system for certain offenses, which happens in a range of states. And so there's work needed to address that. So those are our main priorities at the Sentencing Project, and voting rights is definitely a key among them. And I see Susan Burke has a comment in the chat.
That made me laugh, Bill.
Is there any other questions I can answer? Reactions, feedback? Also happen, if anything I have shared is not landing with you, I'm also happy to respond or engage on any, points of concern or disagreement. But maybe not.
Do you all work with solitary confinement? Sorry, I didn't have enough coffee this morning.
No, I understand. We are certainly supportive of ending solitary confinement and limiting it. That is not a priority of the Sentencing Project, given our focus around criminal sentencing when it does come to imprisonment issues. But certainly stand in support of other organizations that are anchoring those fights and can weigh in, with limited support, maybe signing on to a letter or something like that, but that's certainly not an area of expertise for us. So I would direct folks interested in engaging more on that to the ACLU, the National ACLU's National Prison Project. And I'm sure there are state organizations in Virginia who are doing that. You all might be able to educate me on who some of the state leaders are in Virginia.
Okay, Deb, I have nothing else in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Jen. And Nicole, thank you so much. We've appreciated your expertise and your guidance in this project as we've gotten the closest that we've ever gotten in the past. We're very optimistic that the bipartisan legislation will pass. And we think that it will come up Friday in the House Subcommittee 3, but we don't, House P&E Subcommittee number 3, but we don't know yet because the agenda hasn't come out, but that's what we're watching. So
Oh, that's great. So let's talk. Do you mind if I ask some questions for you guys? So has your next speaker come on yet?
Joan, is he here yet?
I do not see him unless he's traveling incognito. I do not see Delegate Bagby.
Okay, sure, Nicole.
Okay, I was just wondering, so if, since we're in the middle of session now, what would be helpful from the sentencing project right now, if we could pull something together, particularly if you're thinking that a hearing might happen on Friday? Is there anything specific that might be helpful from us?
Let me think and reach out to you.
Okay.
We did a press conference last week with ACLU, NAACP, NoLef Turns, Bridging the Gap, Humanization Project, and we didn't have as much press there as we would like, but there were some great testimonies from returned citizens, and we need to amp up our social media campaign. So anything you can do to help us amplify that.
Well, we can retweet you all, so feel free to share specific social media posts with me. We retweeted the Kentucky League of Women Voters and some of their social media assets earlier this week. So feel free to while I'm online, I'll try to share the Twitter feed of the Sentencing Project, and then you can see what our Twitter feed has looked like over the last week, because we certainly posted some tweets from the Kentucky League on that.
Nicole, we do have a question. Do you have an answer to the concern that prisoners voting could be coerced?
Well, I think that is a slippery slope to restrict voting or to resist votes based on what might happen. I think the goal would be to create the infrastructure that protects and guarantees independent access to the ballot, even from prison. Other jurisdictions have made that possible. Again, folks never lost their right to vote from prison in Maine and Vermont. That hasn't been a struggle there, undermining and diminishing the validity of voter engagement from behind the prison walls. Puerto Rico successfully, expanded the franchise to people in prison custody in the mid-'80s, establishing polling locations in the prisons there, resulting in a fairly high voter participation rate, over 50% in Puerto Rico. Prisons participate in elections. So jurisdictions have done this without any reports or major controversies around incarcerated people and prison people being coerced into voting. I go into prisons, I've gone into prisons over the years, gotten into political debates with prisoners who remain human in spite of being marginalized inside correctional facilities, debating current politics in history. So there are active citizens behind prison walls, and guaranteeing their access to the ballot and creating the infrastructure necessary so that those votes, so that there is no way to undermine their access to the ballot when they get it, is going to be an important part of this work. Could Nicole contact me love to see what she might need? Absolutely. But yes, but also Deb and others will definitely be in touch and follow up on next steps.
And Nicole, if you have a second, there's another question about guardrails. How did these people make it possible for that to happen, and what guardrails were established?
Well, Maine and Vermont, it was never on the it was never a part of their constitution and governing who could vote to limit vote for people in prison. So there never had to be new processes in place. The political culture there is everybody should vote. And, that's just, I remember sitting by accident next to the Secretary of State when I was in Maine working on something else. And his theory was just like, everybody should vote. It's a very different sort of political culture than other parts of the country where people use the pretext of voter fraud as a way to make voting hard for most residents, most citizens in the country. And again, this is a new part of the conversation. So building out the infrastructure, I'm very invested in implementation in DC, because I think that if there is successful voter registration and ballot access efforts for district residents who are in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, which presumably would mostly be by absentee ballot, given the diffuse nature of where imprisoned voters from DC are, then factoring in guardrails and building out the infrastructure is a part of the work right now. In Puerto Rico, a polling location was actually installed in Puerto Rico's prisons, so people just vote like they would go to any polling location and vote. There's an actual effort to install polling locations in county jails throughout the country. There's a polling location in the Cook County Jail in Chicago in 2021. There's efforts to have polling locations in one of the Los Angeles County jails. Los Angeles County has the largest jail complex in the country. So even stateside, even in the States, at the locality level, at the municipality level, there's efforts to create the infrastructure, guaranteeing access to the ballot, not just via absentee ballot, but also via polling location in a handful of lockup facilities around the country. And so those experiences will help build out the conversation so that when other jurisdictions, including states like Virginia, in the franchise allowing people in prison the right to vote, absentee ballots may be part of that conversation, but also determining what the infrastructure might be, including polling locations in certain lockup facilities, might also be part of the conversation as well.
All right. We have no other questions, Deb.
All right. Well, stay in touch with me. Deb, feel free to reach out to me. I will definitely follow up with Senator Locke. I'm here. Sentencing Project is with you all, and good luck this session.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And once we get it through the General Assembly, then we need to get voters to support it at the polls. So the fight doesn't end in the legislation. So
and then it'll even be bigger after too with implementation. I can't tell you, there's been some reporting about even once rights are restored, how people don't know. So there's so much work around voter education, given how confusing the laws are when it comes to this. It's really frustrating and quite sad many times.
Absolutely. Well, have a great day, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Joan, has Delegate Bagby joined us yet?
I do not see him. Delegate Bagby, unless he's under a phone number that I can't see. He's not responding, so I gather he's not here.
Okay. Sheba, are you here and ready to join us?
Yes, good morning. How is everybody?
Sheba Williams is the Executive Director and founder of NoLef Turns. Welcome, Sheba.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. My name is Sheba Williams. I am a Richmond, Virginia native. I founded the organization NoLef Turns back in 2016 out of anger. Not around voting rights, but because of felony disenfranchisement and the collateral consequences that come with a felony conviction. So 2016, we got really into voting rights and the access to voting because our then governor, Terry McAuliffe, wanted to restore the rights of over 231,000 people who had lost their right to vote due to a felony conviction. It was challenged in the Supreme Court, and those rights were rescinded because he didn't have the authority to do blanket restoration of rights for citizens. You have to do it on a one-by-one basis. So he stated that he would get a pen and reinstate each person's rights individually. We went on a door knocking campaign. We went to different organizations. We did a lot of work across the state to make sure that people knew that they were eligible to have their rights reinstated. And we basically got as many people registered as possible. In the interim, a couple of elections have happened, but I have been working on different campaigns and things since I was younger. I was wrongfully convicted of a crime in 2004, and I was sentenced to 5 years of probation, but I lost my right to vote for 9 years because of Virginia's laws about probation and when you're able to be released from probation, even if your terms are up. So I didn't have the ability to vote for 9 years between the periods of 2004 to 2013. Governor McDonnell actually was the person who reinstated my rights, and I have voted in every election since then. Primaries, whatever comes up, I am there to vote. I work as an election poll worker, and we do what we can to make sure that people have access to their vote. Last year, we started working on the campaign for Right to Vote in coalition with a ton of other people. And Senator Mamie Locke at the time introduced SJ 272, which would have given universal suffrage, which would have said that nobody loses their right to vote. There was a challenge with that because a lot of legislators did not want people in prison to vote. So we ended up with a compromise in HJ 555 and HJ 557, which was Delegate Herring and Delegate J. Jones. They combined their bill and they decided to do automatic restoration of rights for individuals who had completed their time in incarceration. So we were in a subcommittee one morning. All of the coalition partners showed up to testify, and there was wording that said that you could not vote until you finished the terms of your incarceration, which included parole and probation. We pointed out that there was a such thing as indefinite probation. Indefinite probation means that you can stay on probation for any amount of time, and it is determined by your probation officer's discretion. We had a young lady that we were working with who was denied access to her ballot because she owed restitution. We paid her restitution so that she could be able to get registered to vote in time for the November election, but her probation officer told her that he would not put her back in court until after the deadline, a day after the deadline to get registered to vote, which was October 15th, I believe. So that is a driver of why we do the work. People should never have to jump through so many hoops and obstacles to be able to voice their opinion about who represents them in school boards and city council and in state and Senate legislation and in the presidency. The main concern is always having a voice about how your life is governed. So we're in this subcommittee and we're talking about indefinite probation, and Delegate Levine asked if I could explain and elaborate on what indefinite probation means to a person who does not have their right to vote. And I said, it means that there is no end period to when they will be released and when they'll be able to return as a whole citizen and be able to participate in the civil process. There was debate in the subcommittee, which was privileges and elections in the House. And I think Delegate Marcus Simon, who was the chair at the time, asked if it would be a friendly amendment to remove the wording about people on probation being eligible to vote. They struck that language. They got in touch with Governor Northam at the time. I think our Secretary of State, Kelly Thomason, was also on the call. And they removed the language about being eligible to vote while you're on probation And shortly after, in April, I believe, Governor Northam reinstated the rights of 69,045 individuals in Virginia who had been disenfranchised. The problem was people get their rights back and it's a celebratory moment, and then they don't know to follow up and get registered to vote. So in our next election, we were looking for people and talking to people who had been eligible to get their rights back in April, and they hadn't taken the second step to get registered to vote. So we're back on that campaign to identify these people and get them registered, and that is pretty much how we got to this point. We felt in coalition with others that you should never lose your right to vote because of the history of what felony disenfranchisement is. It is not about protecting individuals of this state from different things. It was completely punitive and it was completely racist in its nature. The 1902 convention that was held here in Virginia set out to disenfranchise as many Black people as possible. We did an exhibit, and it was an electronic exhibit that's still up with the Richmond Public Library called Block the Vote, and it tells the history of how felony disenfranchise really came to be. It was not about public safety, and it was not about making sure that people were not committing fraud, because you will hear some people say people who have committed crimes should not be on the rolls. They should not be able to vote, and this is voter fraud. But what it really is voter suppression and trying to make sure that we have a tool to disenfranchise as many people as possible through means of mass incarceration. So I'll stop there if there are questions.
There's a comment, 69,000 re-enfranchised in March by Governor Northam. But the problem is there are many people who've had their rights restored, but don't know it yet. And I know I've run into that too, doing voter registration. So is there some way that we can, expand that knowledge?
So yesterday we spoke with District 32's Reentry Council, and they take the measures to make sure that people know the information and get their voter registration application once they are released from incarceration. But it really is an effort to figure out and know who these people are. We don't have access to a roll that says this person has been released from incarceration. And really there's a gap that means that we have to find. We still have to go Zoom to Zoom because door to door is not really the option in 2022 pandemic environment. So we have to do outreach and figure out who are these people who need their rights reinstated. And this is a daily thing, or I dare say a monthly thing, because what used to happen is probation and parole would send a list of people who had been released every month to the governor's restoration rights team, and they would reach out to those people. Of course, with any government thing, that could be lagging, that could be behind, but we really have to figure out what the new administration will do, and if they'll, continue the continuity of getting that information and reaching out to those individuals to make sure that they get their rights reinstated. But we'll do our part to locate as many people as possible. And we always talk to people about their voting rights. We talk to young people who are 17 and who may be 18 before the election to get them registered to vote. We go to athletic clubs. We talk to the football teams and the track coaches and different things like that. We did a live drive, which was getting people registered to vote via Zoom. We would have an event and people who had questions about the process could ask questions, and we would go into a breakout room to go over the personal information and send them the link so that they could get registered online themselves. But we really have to be creative about how we do outreach to people all across the state and make sure that they have that information, because what we are learning is Bath County, Virginia had the highest number of felony convictions in the past decade. Southwest Virginia, it seems like a lifetime away, but in electronic means, we can contact anybody who needs help with that. We always are open and available for questions about the process, and we help as much as we can, but we're one organization. And I know that there are a ton of other people who have the concern and want people to be able to have access to their vote. So there are a lot of people working on it, but there is no easy, fluid way to know who we have to contact at what moment.
There's a question on the exhibit about 1902. Where is that exhibit? Is it online? And how can we
It's
access it?
online on Richmond Public Library's website, and it's called Block the Vote. If you do a search, I'll see if I can pull it up real quick. If you do a search in Richmond Public Library's search link, it'll pull it right up. But it goes back to show the archives, the things that people were subject to, like poll taxes and literacy tests. There are actual artifacts from the time period where people were disenfranchised through different means. And if we're being honest, there were different vestiges of Jim Crow that were we got rid of, like lynching and the poll tax and all these different things, but we did not get rid of felony disenfranchisement.
There's a question, do you have access to data banks to locate people who are not registered after release from incarceration? Or is that a privacy issue? Now we can reach the van, to tell us who's not registered, but is there a special one for recently released people?
We don't have access to that. That was a big thing where the and I believe it's a privacy issue as a private entity. They were getting the information to the governor's office, but us as private citizens didn't have access to that.
Okay, well, there's another question about that. How do you identify these people? So there seems to be no one easy way to do that, unless you work with groups like OAR, Offenders Aid and Restoration, who work with people who are being released. Is there any other way?
Well, we do similar work, but even OAR, and I could be wrong about this, even OAR doesn't get a list of people who are released from incarceration. And because it's been a very recent thing that people on probation have been allowed access, we don't get a particular list.
Do you have any idea if the new Secretary of the Commonwealth will be proactive in notifying those who are eligible? Because that's a loaded question.
I am not sure. From all of the indications that we are hearing from the governor, he wanted to continue the process that Governor Northam, well, actually Governor McDonnell, Governor Northam, Governor McCullough started. So we have yet to see how the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office will manage things going forward.
There are a couple ideas, and I know we use that to reach people in a halfway house situation or in homeless shelters. I know we found many people in low income housing centers who didn't know. In fact, we have a grant, and we have a civics grant, and we're going to be reaching out to homeless shelters and low income with restoration information. Is there a way, someone asked, to reach people prior to them leaving incarceration?
So the only thing that I can think of is getting in touch with our different reentry centers across the state. Deep Meadows is our closest one, which is State Farm. Virginia Correctional Center for Women is another one, but we have to depend on DOC to be proactive about getting people the information, just like they get them information on resources. It could potentially be put in their resource guide to give them this information to check their things. Right now, we really just have to be proactive and creative about how we get in touch with these people not having real access. Because I am a statewide volunteer with DOC, but we haven't been allowed in the prisons for 2 years now because of COVID.
This is sort of like the other one. Do you have any information on the attitude or intention of the new governor? Do you think he'll wait until probation is complete, or will he act? Do you have any news on what they were thinking?
We don't have any news on what they're thinking. We just got a pretty blanket statement that he would continue the work of Governor Northam, but it really is up to us as registered voters, as people who have access to the ballot, as people who can influence our legislators to get SJ1, SJ21, and HB 130 passed, so that the question of whether or not people will have access to their vote goes to the ballot, and it is up to the voters. If we alleviate that part, we don't have to worry about the changing of hands of each administration and how each governor feels about a person having their voting rights back. If we get these two bills passed, it goes to a ballot referendum in November, and we make the decision about whether or not people have their vote.
There's a question about your organization. Can you tell us a little bit more? Do you have staff? What's more about your organization, please?
So we have been all volunteer for the past 5 years. We are hiring this year for our housing person. We actually do reentry services and pretrial support. Voting rights came because we were formulated in May of 2016, and we started volunteering with Restoration of Rights. And we were at the office of the Secretary of the Commonwealth on their last day to get registered to vote in 2016, and the system shut down. We had gone to a mayoral debate that evening, and when we left Altria Theater, all of our phones had been going off about people not being able to get their votes registered, their voter registration through. So there was a huge fight. There were a lot of partners who spoke: ACLU, New Virginia Majority, Bridging the Gap in Virginia, NoLef Turns, and they ended up extending the deadline to get registered to vote by 72 hours because the electoral board's system had shut down. A lot of people said that people have the same 24 hours in a day as everybody else. But the fact is, if you were just notified on the day of that you got your rights reinstated and you were eligible, and you went in to try to submit your registration before the deadline and the system failed, they did not have the same 24 hours. So I think over 72,000 people got registered to vote in that 72 hours. And that was a huge catalyst to how we got started in voter rights. But we really are a reentry organization that helps with the different resources and tools for people coming home from Department of Corrections. We do pretrial support for people in the local region who are facing convictions. We do a lot to try to mitigate making sure that people do not get trapped in this system. We provide the resources necessary to direct people to behavioral health organizations, to different programs. We help them get signed up for Medicaid. We help them get signed up for SNAP. We help them with job training assistance, and we do some housing search with them. Whatever it takes to make sure that people are not going back into carceral systems, because we know that lack of resources is a major source of the reasons why people commit crime. So we try to be that barrier between people going back to prison once they've completed their terms. And voting rights really is a means to reduce recidivism. When people have access to the people who represent them, when they have the ability to run for office and serve as notary publics and serve on juries, they are less likely to reoffend and be incarcerated again.
Sheba, thank you so much. We appreciate the background knowledge that you bring to this issue, the passion that you bring to this issue, and the work that you're doing. It's not just lobbying, you're doing actual work to help people, and we really appreciate all that you do.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Have a great day, and we'll be seeing you around, I know. Our next speaker is Delegate Bagby. Delegate Bagby is the chair of the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus and represents District 74. Welcome, Delegate Bagby.
Good morning. Good morning. Hope everyone is well. Thank you for allowing me to join you, and it was nice to hear you speak a bit about the issues that they're fighting and working on. We had our Virginia Legislative Black Caucus meeting last night, in which we discussed a number of issues that are important to us. It is a large range of items, as you can imagine. but it always ends up starting with education, flowing through housing, justice reform, voting rights, and healthcare all seem to stay at the top of the list. And so we have a number of pieces of legislation that we're proposing with not a great deal of hope that they will actually become law and help individuals in the Commonwealth this session or next session. But what we intend to do is protect the work that I think I know that we're proud of, that we've accomplished over the last couple of years. And that work includes the voting rights legislation that was worked on by Marcia Price and Jennifer McClellan. It includes protecting the work that I did in the area of predatory lending. And you know, that was very important to me to make sure the individuals that are most vulnerable as it relates to their pocketbook were able to be protected from lenders that were charging astronomical interest rates. That includes increases to our not only our historical Black colleges and universities, but also just really focusing on how we support schools, universities and colleges that also support or have a significant number of students on Pell Grants. And so is a large range of items that we have been focused on. We have a 20+ member caucus that I am happy has all have their own strengths and able to move in different spaces. And I'm also excited that I'm continue to serve on the Commerce and Energy Committee, where we're going to make sure that we fight for the minimum wage, and we also fight for healthy environmental issues. So everything from wind, solar, clean energy, all the way around. We are working to make sure that we give it a great deal of thought and collectively work on this together.
If you have questions for Delegate Bagby, please put them in the chat. Joan, do we have any questions yet?
Not yet. There's a question about the lieutenant governor eligible to join, but I don't know if that applies to a House situation.
Yeah, well, you know, I was telling a reporter the other day, it's odd that and this is no shot, it's odd that we talk about our issues, and even with reporters, the first thing they want to talk about is the lieutenant governor. But the lieutenant governor is not eligible to be a member of the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus, but we do look forward to her, just as Justin Fairfax, working with us on some issues. We're just looking for those issues that we can agree upon and work on together. I think making sure Black history is taught in schools is something that she can really work on championing and helping us move past the red meat of CRT. We can really focus on actually what we should be teaching as opposed to what we're not teaching.
I do not see any questions, Deb.
Okay, well, Delegate Bagby, thank you so much. And please
Thank
reach
you.
out if there's legislation you could use our help with.
Thank you so much. And you all have a great morning.
Thank you, you too.
All right, those of you that are here, I hope to see you around.
Thank you.
Be blessed.
You as well. Our next speaker is Gloria Custalow. Ms. Custalow is a member of the Mattaponi tribe. Welcome, Ms. Custalow.
Well, thank you for having me. Good morning. Wingapo. It is an honor and a distinct privilege to join the annual League Day for the League of Women Voters of Virginia. I am Gloria Custalow, an Indigenous Mattaponi woman, reservation resident, business owner, mother, grandmother, and a leader of the Mattaponi insurgency. For Indigenous people, women have a central role in all aspects of our community. We are a maternal society because women's activities promote community well-being. We hold an important political, social, and economic power. Indigenous women have always had the power to become shaman, chiefs, and warriors. Women usually build and own the family housing, farm the land, and gather food, all while raising children and preserving community order. Women, women leaders had and continue to have important roles among the Virginia tribes, with one exception. I will tell you more about that in a moment. In the mid-1500s, the Appomattox tribe had a woman chief. Later in 1607, according to the records of Christopher Newport, members of his party were received by a female chief. She was fearless, unflinching, persuasive leader. Adorned with a copper crown and covered with copper jewelry, she negotiated with settlers like Christopher Newport and countless others. In 1677, the Queen of Pamunkey signed a treaty of peace, a treaty that is acknowledged today with the annual tax tribute to the governor. She too insisted that Indian sovereignty be acknowledged as the guiding principle of negotiations with the settlers. The legacy of her life's work secured the protection of tribal lands along with hunting and fishing rights for all Virginia Indians. She was such an important political leader that she is one of the women included in the Virginia Women's Monument located on the Capitol grounds. In the late 1700s to mid 1800s, Edith Turner was chief of the Nottoway tribe. She was a community-minded leader who negotiated land allotments and brought many corrupt politicians to justice through multiple court cases. In 1820, she provided the Nottoway vocabulary to surveyor John Wood, allowing scholars to peek into their Aquarian-based language. Chief Marie Elizabeth Eliza Custalow Majors led my tribe, Mattaponi, in the late 1700s. Born into one ruling family, she married into another. Her beaded medicine bag was passed down through the chieftain family bloodline of the Majors and Custalows. Her influence and accomplishments were considerable for her time. However, by that time, the European settlers had established their dominant rule in Virginia. European values viewed women as inferior to men, passing laws that excluded women from full rights and privileges of men. Their sexist attitude extended to tribal women, and consequently to the colonists would only consult with men in matters of power and politics. Eventually, to the tribal governments. European influence actually took indigenous people to a place that we had never known, where women were devalued and lacked the ability to provide the balance and power with men. By the late 1800s, Matilda Gage led the National Women's Suffrage Association, along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. The three women traded executive positions over the 20 years of the organization's existence. Having worked for women's rights for 40 years by the 1880s, Matilda Gage and Elizabeth Cady Stanton became increasingly frustrated with their inability to make major gains in their social, economic, or political positions as women by the 1800s. In their disappointment, they looked beyond Euro-America culture to gain a vision of a world of equality from their nearby neighbors. Stanton and Gage grew up in upstate New York, where the land of the Iroquois Confederacy. The Confederacy is composed of 6 nations: the Onondaga, Mohawk, Seneca, Cayuga, Onondaga, and Tuscarora, all who value the roles of women in social, religious, economic, and political positions that were superior to the role of women in the U.S. at that time. The 6 nations Iroquois Confederacy had and still have a family governmental structure based on female authority. Women control the economy in their nations through the responsibilities for growing and distributing the food. They have the final authority over land transfers and decisions about engaging in war. Children came through the mother's line and not the father's. And if the parents separated, the children stayed with their mother. And if she died, it was with their planned family. Women controlled their own property and belongings. Political power was shared, made by consensus in this pure democracy, the oldest continuing democracy in the world. Indigenous women of numerous Native nations had rights, sovereignty, and integrity long before European settlers arrived on these shores. They had complete control of their lives. They maintained economic independence in marriage and lived in a culture free from gender-based violence. Finally, in the 1920s, women in the United States were recognized as having the right to vote. Native women have had their political voice in this land since the founding of the Iroquois Confederation over 1,000 years ago. After 150 years of not having women chiefs in Virginia, Ann Richardson became the chief of Rappahannock tribe in 1998. She is the first woman chief to lead a Virginia tribe since the 18th century. However, our work to secure the rights of Indigenous women to participate in tribal governance is not finished. The Mattaponi tribe, self-appointed all-male government, is the only Virginia tribe that continues to devalue, disqualify, and discriminate against its tribal women. I stand before you today, a Mattaponi woman in 2022, to say that I do not have a voice or vote in my own tribe. It has been over 100 years since the United States Congress ratified the 19th Amendment, guaranteeing all women the right to vote. Gender discrimination is wrong and unlawful according to tribal law. In 1677, Treaty of Peace and according to the U.S. Constitution. Mattaponi women do not have the right to vote or attend. Discrimination against women. Oh, excuse me. We Indigenous women have not come thus far to be denied our rightful place in tribal governance. Our work is not done, and we will not stop until all members of Mattaponi tribe have equal rights as tribal members. Women will not be eliminated from our community. Women are essential to the well-being and the future of the Mattaponi tribe. What I have just shared with you about my tribe, no doubt may shock you. I wake up every day feeling shocked and outraged over the injustice that we Mattaponi people continue to face. I ask that you support our battle for equality. The Mattaponi people have organized our tribal members, and we will hold our first open election for all tribal members over the age of 18 in March of 2022. We ask for your support. We ask you to support for our efforts in our appeal to the state of Virginia. We are seeking a government-to-government relationship between the Commonwealth of Virginia and our tribal leaders, who were elected by a democratic process that includes women. Currently, the Commonwealth of Virginia will only engage with the self-appointed tribal government who violate the rights of its members. I want to thank Joan for inviting me to speak with you today. I look forward to connecting more with the League of Women Voters of Virginia. I will provide Joan with additional contact information on how you make contact with the Mattaponi movement of equality and justice. I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. We have several questions. Number one, people are asking if you could make that history that you provided on women's positions and the whole Indigenous history. Is that available in a document?
Yes, absolutely. And we will share that with you.
Okay, if you can send it to me, I'll make sure everyone gets it. This is from Janet Boyd, our Voter Services Director. What is the best way to work with the tribes on voter engagement in general?
Just supporting our new formed government that we're trying to pull our Mattaponi people together, and there's so many that are looking to be members that do deserve to be members and have a voice. I'm hoping to be able to make contact with our Commonwealth of Virginia to get them to recognize our new formed government that we're trying to put together for equal rights for all tribal members, which is also in our treaty that was.
If I could add something.
Yes.
Hey, you guys.
Introduce yourself.
Hi, this is Ginger. I'm Ginger Reagan. One way that we can all support the Mattaponi in their upcoming election is we need someone or more than one person to come help officiate the in-person voting that's going to be held on the reservation. There is an online option that'll be officiated by an online service. And then we'll have a mail-in ballot option to the PO box. But for the in-person ballot, we're still looking for someone with expertise and experience to officiate that election.
Right, if you send specifics to Deb and myself, we can certainly get that out to folks. There's a question, how can we help? So beyond that, how can we help? And there's also a question about what legislation, if any, is in there, and how can we intercede with the state government to help you?
We can send some more information on that too. I know that Governor Northam a few months ago introduced a bill to the budget allocating $12 million for the federally recognized tribes. And we hope that there was an amendment to this bill to include language, first of all, to include the state recognized tribes. Federal recognized tribes already receive so much funding from the federal government, and it seems only right that Virginia support state recognized tribes who have zero support. And in that language of the bill, we would like for the language to say, to include state recognized tribes whose government has been elected by its members. Because currently the state acknowledges these folks who were not elected by their tribal members. They elected each other, they nominated each other. So that's really kind of been what's held the process back.
Can you differentiate what's the difference between a state recognized and federal recognized, and why isn't there just one recognition?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the Mattaponi have state recognition. it's a whole nother process to apply through the federal government. And the Mattaponi were acknowledged in a treaty, the Treaty of 1677. It's called the Treaty of Peace. And it was a treaty with England recognizing the Mattaponi and the Pamunkey. And so this was a pre-Revolutionary War treaty. And so the annual tax tribute with the governor each year near Thanksgiving is acknowledging that this treaty is alive and well. So you asked what's the difference? Federal tribes have a lot more protections afforded them through the federal government. However, state recognized tribes are deemed legally as wards of the state. So it means that we don't have any recourse through the feds. It's only through the state. And one of the underpinnings is that we are asking for the state to recognize a newly elected government.
Yes.
Does that help?
It does. This is pretty esoteric though, and so that's why a lot of people are saying, thank you. I'm getting a lot of private messages. We love this. We want more information. How can we help? We want to help. We have another question. Is the Council of Churches in Virginia working on tribal issues, and can they help you?
I don't know.
That's the first I've heard of them.
I'd like to know more.
Yes.
Okay, well, Ann Murphy, who's in my league, she put that question in. I'm sure she can give me more information. I can put you in touch with her. She's very active in all of that. So just for clarification, women are not allowed to vote in your tribe. This is the crux of the problem, right?
Correct.
And they had, okay, sorry.
No say, no voice. We're not allowed to attend any tribal meetings. We pay taxes. Yeah, we pay the taxes the same as the men, and there's been a while that I had to pay double. So, but that's why I wanted my voice. But they gotten too comfortable with just this one little group of men, and they denied us when the opportunity to be federally recognized come about to the tribe, which we were all excited about, the members. That 5 little men government there turned it down. And we're the only tribe that does not have federal recognition in Virginia.
You're the only Virginia tribe that doesn't have federal recognition.
Yes, we're the only tribe in Virginia that does not have federal recognition, and it was turned down by the existing council now that deny women their rights, equal rights.
It was an effort to maintain control. If they were to have federal recognition, of course, you have to oblige and follow constitutional law, the law of the United States, and by avoiding that federal recognition process, it allowed these self-appointed people to maintain total control and power. And then this is where the issue of sovereignty becomes the stick that holds them down. Because, the only people who can change this are the Mattaponi people themselves, because they are a sovereign nation. And so it's a convenient way for others to say, oh, it's not our issue, it's your issue. So that's what the Mattaponi people have done, is organize their own social movement and to address their issues. And that's what they've done. And they've been organizing it for many years. And so it's led to this election that's about to happen in March. And so once the members actually elect their new official government, then the task will be to ask from a government to government relationship with the state, ask the state that they will engage in a tribal governance that was elected through a democratic process, and not engage in a group of self-appointed men who exclude the rights of the members. Does that make sense?
Yes. There's a question: how many women in general are affected by this? How many women in the tribe that have no voice?
None of the women have a voice.
But is there a
Not
number?
one.
Well, the tribal rolls are kept from the members. So how many members are actually on the roll? No one is allowed to know that. That's another problem why they're reorganizing.
No transparency with the tribal government and any members, especially the women members.
Okay, so there's two steps here. This election needs to take place in March where the women will vote, correct? And
Yes.
then needing to get those elections, that election recognized by the
By the
men
women.
and then the state, is that it? Or the state without the men? I'm getting questions about how that
The
works.
tribal men aren't opposed to women having their votes. It's the handful of men that are in the governmental positions in the tribal government. So we're talking what, 7 men, Gloria? How
Yeah,
many?
just 7 men have turned us down, but we have several men that support us, that want to see us with equal rights and want more balance in our tribal government because we haven't grown. We're only diminishing. There's so many members that have every right to be a member of women, to have a voice, that are just not heard of. Our voices are not heard by our tribal government. And we've been asking for many years. I wrote the first letter to our tribal government back in 2016, asking them to please recognize the Mattaponi women, that we could be so much help to balance our government and make things better for all of our people, even our children that are coming up. We want them to be proud. Right now, with us not having a voice, it's shameful. And our words are falling by deaf ear, heard by deaf ears. They just their excuses for all these years, when I've even written letters back saying, please reply to my first letter. We're working on it. And if you ask them today, the last time I called, the chief said, please work with us on this. We don't want to blow this out of proportion. We just want a voice. We want to be in the meetings. I'll be helpful in myself. The same thing he said is we're working on it. And when I asked him, I said, well, what you're working on is women's rights. He hung the phone up on me. So I'm not getting anywhere with our local government. They have their own agenda. I'm not sure what it is, but I know that we need to move forward for our children's future, if not our own. And that's why we are at this point right now.
There's a final question about local media cover this. And actually, that's how I found you, because I read an article of who was representing you, which is Claire Gastañaga, who's from ACLU. So there is local media, but if you could please send me, there's lots of requests coming to me privately for how do we help? How do we help?
Oh,
Great
wonderful.
speech,
That's great.
heartfelt speech.
Appreciate it.
You really moved people today. I can tell you that. And so anything you send us, I will make sure it goes out to everyone.
Appreciate
That's
it.
great. Jen, what we'll
Will.
do is we'll put together Gloria's speech, and then we'll provide links to all of the recently published articles on this issue. And so people can become more aware, and then we'll provide 2 contact points for you for others to engage directly with Gloria and then with the newly organized tribe. It's info@mattaponitribe.org. But we'll put that down and we'll get it all to you. And I just want to add one more little thing here. In the last, I would say probably 2 years, the self-appointed government has also excluded every male member of the tribe from tribal meetings, from tribal votes, from tribal business. So something that started with denying all women has now grown to exclude all other members. So in other words, what we're telling you is there are a handful of self-appointed men who have taken control of the identity and the destiny of the tribal entity and excluded all members. It's stunning. It's 2022, and this is happening on the back door of the state's capital.
And Deb, we do have one other quick question, and you alluded to it. What geographical area do you cover?
We're in King William County.
Yeah, our address is West Point, Virginia, and
Okay.
located in King William County.
Okay, well, thank you, Deb. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Gloria, and I'm sorry, is it Ginger?
Ginger.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story. We're certainly, we kind of know how that feels, and really, we'll be in touch. So
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. We'll follow up soon. Thank you.
our next speaker is Delegate Charniele Herring. Delegate Herring serves the 46th district.
Hi, everybody. It's good to be with you today, and thank you for having me. Just wanted to touch a bit on voting rights. This session, well, let me take a step back. Before 3 years ago, basically, Virginia was ranked at the bottom when it comes to voting access. We were ranked 49th in the nation, and in 2 years, we brought our ranking up from 49 to 12th in the nation. We passed a whole lot of legislation from no excuse absentee voting, Sunday voting, elimination of the voter ID requirement, making it just everything more accessible to Virginia voters. And we also passed the Virginia's own Voting Rights Act, the first state in the South to do so, which protects voters from disenfranchisement and repealing a lot of our discriminatory laws. But this session, we see an effort, a concerted effort to repeal basically everything that we push forward. It's disheartening. I'm glad that we have the Senate there. They certainly are a brick wall. They defeated some measures just yesterday, which is exciting, that would have repealed and rolled back what we've accomplished. There is one measure that the League of Women Voters has worked very hard on, and happy about our partnership, was the automatic restoration of voting rights. So as you know, last year we did pass that bill, which also recognizes a fundamental right to vote. We had our intervening election, and again, I filed that constitutional amendment. Now there is a Republican who's also filed it as well. So the question is whether we can get through our House Privileges and Elections Committee. I'm hopeful that we can, because this transcends party affiliation. It's just the right thing to do. And again, our Constitution really does not explicitly recognize the fundamental right to vote. So I'm looking forward to the work ahead, and I thank you all for your partnership. And I'm available for questions.
I got a private question. Are there any other voting bills that you are sponsoring that you want us to support or hear about?
Oh, thank you. No, that the restoration of voting rights is the only one. We did so much in the past 2 years. Not to say that there's not more work to do, but I really wanted to concentrate it on the restoration of voting rights. Some of you know, have known me since I've been here, but that's something that I've been fighting for ever since I've gotten here. This is my 13th session. I think I started fighting for it in earnest in my second session. And I have to pay respect and homage to Senator Yvonne Miller, who was she was the champion of that issue. And it just, I think she would be very proud of the progress we've made in voting rights here in Virginia, and would tell us all to keep pushing.
There's a question. We know that there is a Republican who has dropped a similar, but there's a question about, do you have broader support from across the aisle? And there's also a question about which bills were stopped in committee yesterday. You mentioned something about the committee.
Oh, so support across the aisle. I think there are some Republicans that do support automatic restoration of voting rights and recognizing fundamental right to vote in our Constitution. I do not know the measure. I hear that there's a lot of pushback. I'm not in that caucus, so again, we'll see, but I think it will take just certainly advocacy from the league and other organizations to make this happen. I'm not on the Privileges and Elections Committee, but I can tell you one of the most egregious bills most egregious defeat of a bill was curbside voting for those with disabilities, developmental disabilities. Again, just ludicrous and absurd. And again, it's just a representation of the effort to make voting more difficult. So that one did get some attention because it just sort of defied logic.
Yeah, well, there's actually a comment from Nicole Porter, one of our speakers. Nicole, do you want to jump on, and since you're here? No, Nicole? Anyway, she said she was impressed by the conservative
You had
support.
me in the middle of fixing my ponytail. Sorry about that.
Oh, I
Yeah.
know that feeling.
Yeah, no, I was noticing the tweets earlier this week. So there is conservative support. I guess it's a question of how that aligns with legislators, who actually have a vote.
Right.
But there is, from Americans for Prosperity and also Prison Fellowship have signaled support.
Absolutely. No, and right. And you're absolutely right, Nicole. And, they've also supported criminal justice reform measures, Americans for Prosperity. But you're right. The question is how that translates to leadership in the Republican caucus and, and to those legislators. But it's just so fundamental that I'm hopeful, and we're just going to have to just keep pushing forward.
What are the best arguments to the Republicans on the restoration of right amendment? What's our best argument? Several.
If they believe in our criminal justice system, right, and the concept that we have in Virginia about rehabilitation, and believe that people do rehabilitate, then this is just a matter. This is the last step to fully integrate individuals into our society. Evidence shows that those who participate in our voting, the recidivism rate is lower. So that's another good argument for them and sort of their ideology. But it's just that missing piece in our Constitution, recognizing that people have the right and access to the ballot to vote. So
there's two that are sort of linked. There's a question about concern for any of the hard-won access will be rolled back, such as having voter ID again, dropping the 45-day early voting, eliminating drop boxes. And someone noted that yesterday, all of the bills to that effect that Senator Chase tried to pass were killed in the Senate.
That's right.
So is there hope that the Senate will hold what we already have?
Oh, yes. With that defeat, those will not be repealed, at least this year. So we have to just make sure everyone stays healthy over there in the Senate, and that they're there to be the brick wall, because if it gets to the governor's desk, those bills will be signed.
There's a question, are the Democrats tight in their support for this amendment? Is there any waffling from the Democrats?
And no waffling in the House caucus, and I don't think there will be any waffling in the Senate. Can't speak for the Senate, but there's no evidence, especially given the vote last year.
There's also a comment that the Secretary of Administration designate believes in second chances, so that seems to be a good sign.
Well, that's good, and that'd be great if she is vocal. That would be helpful. About that. Second chances for some may not mean, something for somebody else. And some people believe that you have to go through a process with the governor and get permission. And it should not be left to the stroke of a governor's pen about whether you get your voting rights back. As soon as you serve your time, you've paid your debt, and it is time for us to fully integrate people into our society.
Are we one of the few states? There's a question that came to me. How many states are as difficult as Virginia? Do you know, to get their rights back?
Well, now to get the rights back, I think Virginia, there's only one other state, as I recall, if I'm recalling correctly, and that's Kentucky, the Commonwealth of Kentucky. So I think we're the two last that doesn't have some sort of some form of automatic restoration. So yeah, we're behind most states.
Do we have any other questions for Delegate Herring? Deb, I do not see any.
Oh, thank you all so much. I really appreciate the time.
Delegate
Thank you.
Herring,
Yes.
thank you so much for your advocacy, for your work for voting rights for all, and for carrying on what, as you noted, has been a long fight ever since Delegate Miller. So thank you, and
Thank you.
we will be working with you to get these passed.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you all. It's good to see you. Bye.
Joan, is Mr. Walker in the room?
I do not see Mr. Walker. I told him we were running ahead of schedule, but I do not see him yet in here. We have
Are there
time
any
for-
Are there any questions from anybody so far? Actually, give me 1 second.
There's a request for a 5-minute restroom break.
You can do that, but you're going to miss Claire Gastañaga is here in the room, and she's going to talk about other people that will get their voting rights back with this legislation that are not just returning citizens. Thank you, Claire. Sorry.
Thanks, no problem, Deb.
Glad to be with you.
I'm going to take my mask off if that's okay, so I can I can see you all. The constitutional amendment not only includes the provision that takes away the Jim Crow era racially limiting ability to vote, the felony conviction provision, but it also changes a part of the Constitution that was put in place at the same time as part of the eugenics movement and also part of Jim Crow, which is the provision that says that if you are adjudicated legally incompetent, you can't vote. And the problem with that is that, you know, one of the things that we've learned over the years of understanding better developmental disabilities, whether we're talking about Down syndrome or autism or any of the other developmental disabilities, one thing we've learned is that every single person is different. And you can't sort of create a broad swath restriction on people based on their disability. So the language in the proposed amendment flips the presumption. So it currently says if you get adjudicated legally incompetent, like you can't manage your checkbook, so you get a guardian, you lose your right to vote. It flips it to say you can only lose your right to vote if a judge has made a finding that you do not have the ability to comprehend voting. In other words, it would require a very specific adjudication relative specifically to the capacity to understand what it means to vote. And that's huge. I mean, nationwide, there are hundreds of thousands of people with autism, particularly who've been disqualified from voting because their families have gone ahead and gotten guardianships in circumstances not understanding the full implications. And in Virginia, we have judges who sometimes will look at this in the guardianship process and hope to preserve the right to vote, but it's just not clear those are legally binding, because the Constitution says if you're adjudicated incompetent, you lose your right to vote permanently until you go back to court and the court says, no, you're no longer legally incompetent. So New Jersey did this flip back in 2007, 2008. And so it's time for us to flip the switch to make sure that nobody loses their right to vote unless it is absolutely the case that they cannot comprehend what it means to vote. So lots of reasons for all of us to come together around this in an intersectional way to make sure that the House does the right thing, the Senate having already voted these provisions out of committee.
Claire, I did get a question privately.
Sure.
How do the developmentally disabled people get caught into this trap?
Well, most of the time it's because their loved ones make a decision to go to court and get a guardianship for them. They think that's protective. It ensures, for example, that folks can't make uninformed contracts to buy things and other things like that. And so most families don't know that when they seek a guardianship that they are expunging that person's right to vote, extinguishing that person's right to vote.
And then
I have a brother who's an autistic savant, for example, who lives in New Jersey, and we made a choice never to seek a guardianship because the implications of it were too broad.
and then that it's up to then the person to get that removed, right? Or they have to have, or the family has to remove it.
Right, but under the constitutional amendment as it's now written, if you're adjudicated legally incompetent, which is a broad brush decision that is part of most guardianships, you automatically also lose your right to vote. There's no way to preserve your right to vote. And this would change this to say guardianships go on and decisions are made, but a person only loses their right to vote if a judge in that process or some other process makes an individualized decision that that individual doesn't have the capacity to understand what voting means.
What about all the people that are already adjudicated?
Well, the good news is that I would argue that if there isn't a specific provision in an existing guardianship provision that says that they don't have the capacity to vote, that if this passes, people will be able to vote who currently are not able to vote because their guardianship won't explicitly include language that suggests that they don't have the capacity to vote.
Well, and this is a typical League of Women Voters question I just got privately. How do we then tell these people that they have their rights restored? Do we have a mechanism to inform them?
Well, I mean, the good news is that when you run a statewide ballot initiative, part of what you're doing is educating the public. So education of the public will be a natural part of the statewide ballot initiative and the campaign that we're going to have to run to win the voters' hearts and minds to vote for this constitutional amendment.
Great.
And then, you know, there'll be lawyers who learn this in CLE and so when they're working with people on future guardianships, they'll understand. And, you know, I mean, it'll take a while for it to be completely well understood, but the ballot campaign itself could be a huge part of the voter education.
Great, thank you.
A question in the room? Yeah.
So this is really broad in general, it sounds like what's the current law. So I teach college, my students are very interested in Britney Spears guardianship. If Britney Spears was in Virginia, Britney Spears would essentially not be able to vote.
Correct.
All people that are even not essentially have this ability.
Right. Yeah, anybody adjudicated legally incompetent, it doesn't matter why. So, you know, if you got concerned about somebody's ability to manage their financial affairs, normally you would go and get a decision. And I've talked to judges who don't know that what they're doing is extinguishing the right to vote.
Claire, we didn't hear the question. Can you?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was, if Britney Spears was in Virginia, would she have lost her right to vote? And the answer is yes, because she was adjudicated legally incompetent as part of her guardianship process. And so for all those years she was under guardianship, no matter whether you're developmentally disabled or otherwise considered to be incompetent, you lose your right to vote.
Okay. And there is one question, what is the bill number?
Oh, there are a bunch of bill numbers. So on the Senate side, Senate Joint Resolution 1 is the resolution that has to pass again this year. Senate Bill number 21 is the ballot bill. That's the bill that sets out the question that will actually go on the ballot, and that has to be passed as well. And then in the House, there are several bills. Mike Cherry's is what, HJ 9, and his ballot bill is HB 130. And that's probably the lead vehicle if something's going to move forward. But Delegate Herring has a ballot initiative bill and a resolution, as does Delegate Price. So there are a bunch of different bills, but I would focus, let's first get the Senate bill passed and over to the House, but I think we need to be putting pressure on the Speaker, who at last, I didn't look this morning, but last time I looked, he hadn't even sent these bills to committee.
Well, can I ask a question? I thought you said this was going to be a constitutional
It
amendment.
is a constitutional amendment, but to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot, you have to do two things. You have to pass a resolution 2 years in a row, but then you also have to pass an implementing bill that says, this is what the Board of Elections has to do. This is the question that's going to be on the ballot. And the interesting piece of that is that while the governor has no role in approving the resolution, the governor can play around with the ballot bill. And when we were working against the so-called marriage amendment back in 2006, we worked really hard to get the ballot bill set up so that the question was asked in a way that we were more, we were happier with. We weren't happy that it was going to be on the ballot at all, but so I think that's the other piece we have to be conscious of, is that we need to be talking to the governor and the governor's people about how important it is that that ballot bill go forward undisturbed if we can get it out of the legislature. You question the way it's crafted is pretty straightforward. But there's always a little extra added attraction in legislative procedures. Yeah, and most people don't know that the governor doesn't have any role in whether we get the thing to the ballot on the referendum, but he does have a role in and can choose to amend or tinker with the ballot bill.
Okay, no more questions here.
Oh, good. All right. Well, I was happy to answer your question, Deb.
Claire, thank you so much for your on the spot advocacy there. We appreciate all the work that you've been putting in for the many years trying to get this bill passed. And I know that you speak from personal experience with a group of people who are often overlooked, and appreciate your educating us. So thank you. Our next speaker is Richard Walker. He's the founder and CEO of Bridging the Gap. Richard, thank you and welcome this morning.
Oh, we can't hear you for some reason. There you go. A little bit louder.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, that's better.
Okay, that's better.
Perfect.
Very good. Well, I just got on and I caught the tail end of what Claire was expressing, and pretty much I ditto everything she said. For me to follow behind Claire, I don't know how much more I can offer, other than the various individuals that I know since I've gotten my rights restored back in 2012 by former Governor McDonnell. So that opened up the floodgates for me to help assist thousands of others since then. I was a part of Bob McDonnell's stakeholders group for restoration of rights. Terry McCullough stakeholders group restoration of rights, along with the secretary Thomason, and prior to her, LeVar Stoney, who was the secretary, and then most recently with Governor Northam. I was on his stakeholders advisory group for automatic restoration of rights. The key issue here with the Republican administration, that if we do not get this in as an amendment to the Constitution, they have the right to rescind any executive orders that are currently in place. So it behooves us that we push this legislation forward, that if you know of any Republicans that you can sidle up to and get them to sway their vote, that they will be in favor of this Constitution amendment. SJ1 or HB 130, the HB 130 is by a Republican delegate, Mike Cherry. Okay, so he is the one that is championing that legislation for this to be on the ballot come November. So there's another delegate by the name of Ren Williams that we're like tiddling on the edge to try and convert him to support the legislation. So this is where we're at right now. We're expecting, believing, hoping that it comes out of P&E, privileges and elections by Friday, and that it'll go to the floor in the House. So there's a lot of work that folk like myself, Deb, Wake, we're all a part of the Right to Vote Coalition. And we've been probably meeting for well over 2 years now, okay, to push this amendment to the Constitution. Like I said, I've been involved since prior to when I came out of incarceration and realized that in the Commonwealth of Virginia, if you're a convicted felon, you lose your right to vote. And I became angry. I became motivated and passionate to help change that legislation in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So that's began my journey of going throughout the entire state, promoting automatic restoration of rights. You know, I joined up with a colleague of mine, Lily Branch Kennedy, and we created what we call a mobile justice tour, where we went through 22 different localities throughout the state of Virginia, mobilizing individuals around criminal justice reform, the right to vote, and other issues that have been adversely affecting primarily low-income communities, marginalized communities, communities of color, you know, and primarily Black African-American men. So we've been pushing this. You know, I've been involved. My nonprofit is Bridging the Gap in Virginia, which I started maybe 3 years after I came out of incarceration. And mind you, I did local time in Riverside Regional, and then I went to the Department of Corrections, Camp 23 in Halifax, Virginia, and simultaneously I did federal Bureau of Prisons time. And that's where everything that I've been involved in since coming out of incarceration has been involved around criminal justice reform and everything dealing with dehumanization of mental health, you know, decriminalization of mental health, rather. There are too many people incarcerated these days that have mental health issues, you know. So there's a lot of changes that have happened in the past 10 years, but there's still a lot of change and barriers that must happen now. You know, when you talk about mandatory minimums, expungements, solitary confinement, reinstating parole, the decriminalization of mental health, bringing the recidivism numbers even lower, and then oversight in the Department of Corrections. You know, those are pieces of legislation that we are pushing for, advocating for, and hoping that we can help get some of this legislation passed. I'm excited where we are with the right to vote bill, and hoping that, you know, come November, it will be in the hands and the decision of the people as opposed to the politicians. You know, so that's our end game, our end goal, is to get this legislation passed through this session. The reality of it is, those who have completed their sentences, they should not have to be continuously punished. You know, individuals coming out of incarceration, they have barriers of employment, barriers of voting rights, barriers of housing, and I guess I did gainful employment. You know, if a lot of these intersectional barriers were to be removed, it would be a more just and fair and equitable Commonwealth. You know, the Commonwealth of Virginia would benefit from removing these barriers because it would put people to work in pretty fairly decent, lucrative jobs. It will help them to maintain their families, keep the family reunification together, that these parents, these children are not being raised by a single parent household. That these children would do better in school because they don't have a father that is incarcerated or that is unable to get gainful employed, that they can emulate and transfer those that they see in their parents in their school environment. Legislation, criminal reform, justice reform, environmental justice reform, all of it adds to the coffers of the Commonwealth of Virginia, for one, and most Republicans, they're looking at the financial aspect. If you remove some of these barriers, financially, the state would be in a better place. It would be in a more stable set that it can prosper more than it already has. Because you're putting people to work. You're allowing folk to have a better quality of living. So those are the goals primarily, I'm sure we have in common. And it's just a matter of getting at some point, and I hate to push back on it, but prior to this election and the last 4 years, we had those opportunities, but we did not take advantage of it. The folks that we elected into office did not do their due diligence to eradicate a lot of this legislation that is still hindering folk from having a better quality of life in the Commonwealth of Virginia. When they told me when McDonald restored my rights back in 2012, he initially rejected it in 2010, but then in 2012, after doing probably about 10 pieces of documents that I had to submit, he granted me my rights. At that same year, the former NAACP president, Ben Jealous, was here in Richmond. And Ben Jealous stated, he says, there's one thing to be put on punishment for doing wrong, but it's another thing to be left on punishment for the rest of your life. And that's what the Commonwealth of Virginia has done to folk. They've left them on punishment for the rest of their lives. I have folk that have been released from prison 10, 15, 20 years ago, that deserve an opportunity. They have already proven themselves to be productive members of society, but these barriers from not having their records sealed, has denied them a lot of opportunities of moving forward in more lucrative and more meaningful employment, has denied them the opportunity to move into more suitable housing, because they still do background checks. These background checks have denied a whole lot of folk in the Commonwealth of Virginia from moving forward in their lives. If they, not even talking about public housing, but talking about private property management housing, garden apartments throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia, any convicted felon cannot move in them. And that's denying them the opportunity of being able to live like you and I, because of all of these barriers that have been placed on them through criminal justice and legislation and issues surrounding past crimes, mistakes that individuals have made. Mine at the time was as a direct result of substance abuse. Rather than giving me an alternative program of help for my substance abuse issues, they sent me to prison. And that's just not fair. Alternative sentencing needs to be at the forefront of our judicial system in the state of Virginia. Mental health dockets. There should be mental health dockets throughout the entire Commonwealth. For individuals that do have mental health issues, they can be addressed as opposed to just locking them up. DOC, the Department of Corrections, is not, they do not have the capacity to handle individuals coming in there with mental health issues. These local jails, the regional jails, they do not have the expertise to handle individuals that are coming in there. And ultimately, most individuals that come into incarceration with a mental health issue, they end up in solitary confinement because they do not have the capacity to handle their issues. You know, and they're left in, some folk I know have been in solitary confinement for 3, 4, 10, 15 years. And that's cruel and inhumane treatment. And that needs to stop. You know, when they restored my rights, they told me I had the right to vote, which I did. I had the right to sit on a jury, which probably about 2, 3 weeks later, I got a letter to report for jury duty. Then they told me I had the right to be a public notary, which I am. And then they told me I had the right to run for political office. June of 2020, I ran for 71st District House of Delegates, you know, as a formerly incarcerated convicted felon. Because they told me I have that right, I took advantage of it. You know, for a first-time campaign, you know, I got 30% of the vote, you know, against the incumbent, Jeff Bourne. You know, but I got a taste of, to allow individuals to know, because I'm not that person that you incarcerated me for. You know, and that's the message that has to come out bold and clear and loud, that individuals have examples and samples of individuals that have made mistakes, but have been able to move forward in their life to a better quality of living. And when Virginia gets to that point, Virginia, the entire Commonwealth will be better for it. Any questions?
We do have a quick question about what is bridging the gap, if you could say a little bit more. And then we had a question that about what Claire was speaking about the people who have been judged mentally incapacitated. Does that put an extra burden on the families, or how do we handle the extra burden on the families if the bill is passed, so that they then have to go through the process of undoing the wrong, if you will, or does it become automatic?
Well, my field of endeavor has been in the area of mental health. Okay, and I've had clients that they weren't deemed or put into the effect that they are severe mental health issues, but have some deficits. I was able to support them with going to court and getting alternative sentencing. If this legislation passes, you know, I have individuals coming out of incarceration that never voted in their lives, didn't have a clue what to do in the polling place. But there was a signage, a document in the registrar's office that you can sign as a support for that individual to help them understand the voting process. You know, so if this legislation, this bill comes through, we're hoping that that would be the case, that through the Department of Elections, you know, an individual will have that right to vote, you know, with the guidance of or assistance of someone that they designate. Okay, so that's part of the goal here as well. As far as my organization, Bridging the Gap in Virginia, as a direct result, as I stated earlier, once I came out of incarceration and realized that, you know, the laws and legislation in the Commonwealth of Virginia denied me the right to vote, which I have voted ever since I turned 18, that it was a part of my family's edict that we had to vote because of what they went through in order to get voting rights in the United States, in the Constitution. So when I found out I couldn't vote, that's when I became motivated, became angry, became an advocate to change the laws in Virginia. Bridging the Gap in Virginia, we work with formerly and currently incarcerated convicted felons. I've gone to parole board meetings to help get individuals out of incarceration. During COVID, I had some awesome sponsors that helped assist individuals with their first 2 months of rent that were coming out of incarceration because of COVID. And we were able to put them in housing down in the Hampton Roads area. I also go to court to hopefully for alternative sentencing And then as a direct result of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline that was coming through my family's land out in Union Hill, Buckingham County, I got involved in environmental justice. So we defeated Dominion and Atlantic Coast Pipeline from coming through a historical African-American community of Union Hill. And as a direct result of that, I've been very heavily involved in environmental justice. I currently run or coordinate a solar panel installation training program, which we just concluded our last training 2 weeks ago. Then we have another one upcoming at the end of February. So every 6 weeks, we're committed to providing free training to individuals that are in low-income communities, individuals coming out of incarceration, individuals primarily communities of color, and training them for free on how to install solar panels. I've gotten so much support from solar companies that they show up at the end of each session. On that last day, we hand out their certificates as well as provide luncheon, and we have industry representatives show up from various solar companies, and they get the chance to interview our folk. They get a chance to hire our folk. They become eligible for the national NAPCEP exam that will give them that national certification in the form of an associate's degree. So we're excited about this. It's been going on since Union Hill back in 2018. But we just got in the budget through, ironically, through Jeff Bourne. He put our program in his budget for appropriation for the 2022 budget. And hopefully that fund will come to us and that we can continue to do it for free. So there's a lot going on.
Deb, I think you said you had a question in the room.
Yes. Yeah, does this bill, this new constitutional amendment, how does it address those coming out of jail but are still on probation?
Well, currently, through Governor Northam, anyone that's coming out of jails or prisons, they can still get their rights automatically restored, even though they're on probation or parole. So we're hoping that that maintains, that as soon as they walk through those gates, their rights will be automatically restored. There is a 2-week window right now currently for individuals coming out of incarceration for that process. Once they report to probation parole sends their paperwork through to the registrar's office, and as well as through to the secretary's office. And from that point, they merge. They have a data bank or talking computers that will let them know that this person came out of incarceration on this day. He responded and reported to probation and parole. They in turn submit their information to the registrar's office, and at that point in time, their rights have been restored. So it's like a two-week turnaround window. Yeah, and we're hoping that that's going to be a part of this this bill, this constitutional amendment, that they automatically will have their rights restored once they walk out of incarceration or jail.
Richard, thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah.
We appreciate your experience and how you're putting that to work for others. And we love your passion and we love working with you. And we're going to get this thing passed. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, ladies. I appreciate it. Thanks again. Happy Lobby Day.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nicole Kanter Cohen. I'm sorry, that's Michelle Kanter Cohen, and she's the Policy Director and Senior Counsel for Fair Election Legal Center. And Michelle has experience in trying to get this issue passed in Florida. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here. Yeah, so I am Policy Director and Senior Counsel at Fair Election Center. We are a national nonprofit 501c3, and we're focused on removing barriers to voting and supporting measures that make it easier to vote and make voting more accessible for all Americans. And we work in a number of states. Virginia is one of our priority states. I've been working on policy in Virginia now for some time. Yeah, as Joan mentioned, we worked on actually some litigation in Florida that was supportive of the effort for returning citizens to get their rights back. So I'm just going to briefly talk about each of our programs, and then I'll certainly be happy to take any questions. So one of the areas that we work in is policy and advocacy. So I kind of have a dual role, both doing policy and litigation work. And so in that capacity, we work on tracking state legislative developments, and weighing in where we can, and working with state coalitions. Definitely love working with the League in Virginia and elsewhere on our policy issues, and just trying to track what's going on, look out for bad bills, support good bills, good developments. We were so heartened by all the major changes to Virginia's voting laws in the last few years that have made voting so much more accessible. And we hope to continue to improve that and prevent any backslides. One thing we also keep our eye on is administrative changes. And that's certainly something that we'll be paying a lot of attention to as far as the Department of Elections and the State Board of Elections. One area that we were involved in the past was, and worked with the League on this, was in around voter purges, when there are anti-voter groups around the country, and this is continuing, unfortunately. There's some there's definitely national scope to this, that some of these groups go around and try to get election officials to aggressively purge the rolls without regard to protections for voters, and the policies that are required as safeguards by the National Voter Registration Act, and other laws. So this was actually my previous capacity, my previous job, but I enjoyed working with the League on that issue very much. So that's an issue that's, we're continuing to watch nationally, that has affected Virginia. As far as the rights restoration and right to vote amendment, we're extremely supportive of this passing. We recently, my colleague Cecilia Aguilera published an op-ed in a few outlets in Virginia in support of the effort. And one thing that we wanted to share and point out in this piece is that this is such a bipartisan issue, that voters across the country, and in Florida in particular, where this passed the ballot, in a state like Florida that has 2 Republican U.S. senators and a Republican U.S. House delegation and all of that, Republican governor, their rights restoration amendment passed by 64% of the vote, and that's the voters voting on that measure. And this really demonstrates that when you ask the voters what they want, they believe in second chances, and they believe that people should be able to get their rights as a citizen back when they've served their sentence. So that's I think a really good illustration of the bipartisan nature of that issue when it comes to voters. I think I'll just talk a little bit about some of our other work at Fair Election Center. Right now, actually, we're starting a trial on Monday in Florida that's challenging the restrictive voter registration drive laws there. That were passed as part of an omnibus bill, SB 90, which also restricted vote by mail in various ways, among other things. And so that trial starts Monday. It's gonna be 2 weeks. there'll be an audio feed if anyone's interested from the public. But it's, our opportunity to bring our case and show that these laws, they're constitutional claims as well as others brought by other plaintiffs. Our other litigation work really runs the gamut. We have a particular focus organizationally on student voters, so that's one thing that we pay a lot of attention to. Our Campus Vote project is one of our major programs, and it basically exists to develop relationships between college administrators and our student coordinators, with the goal of having voter registration and civic engagement integrated into the campus work and into the campus's own life. So like when you're registering for classes, people are being offered the opportunity to register to vote and things like that, so that it really becomes not like a year-to-year thing where they're always trying to look for new people to to do that work, but that it's institutionalized as part of the regular life of the campus. And it also has the when something is coming from the provost or the student life director or something like that, it has that extra kind of push for students to get involved. And so kind of connected with that, wanted to mention one of our other recent programs in Virginia. This year we had a redistricting program and specific fellows to work on redistricting, student fellows. And so we had students testifying at the redistricting hearings about the importance of college students and college communities as communities of interest. We work with both 2-year and 4-year institutions. And currently we have, it's about 15 campuses where we have student fellows. And then we're working with another 5 or so campuses as voter-friendly campuses, and that's where they meet certain benchmarks to be considered a voter-friendly campus. And then, so kind of connected to that, but also just our broader mission to make sure that people have the information they need to be able to participate. We have several guides. One is a more general voter guide. That has information on like vote, how to vote by mail, how to vote absentee, how to vote by mail, how to register to vote, things like that, to make sure that people really kind of are able to access the opportunities to vote. And then we also have our registration drive guides, and that's basically a rundown. We have them for every state. A rundown of all the registration drive policies that apply in the particular state. And so I think those links either have just been sent around or were put in the chat or something. I know I saw them pop up on my screen not too long ago.
Yeah, there are a few, pardon me, there are a few questions.
Okay.
Are there any special messages that we can talk to conservatives about restoration of rights? What are the key ones that appeal, whether they're social conservatives or economic conservatives? And the other one is, you mentioned 15 campuses in Virginia. Which ones?
So I don't have the list on me, but I can get that to you. My colleague, who's the Virginia student coordinator, probably can rattle them off the top of her head. I cannot, but I'm happy to get that to you. As far as messaging, I know that the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition collectively refer to themselves as the Second Chances campaign. And I believe that's because everybody believes that people are entitled to a second chance. And that one thing that I know resonated in Florida too was that everybody knew somebody that was affected, right? This is such a broad policy that, and there's so many things that get criminalized and for, some for nefarious reasons over history, that the number of people that fall into this situation is a lot. And so, making it personal, I think is always important. I mean, I think that's important probably in any campaign, but, I think that is true probably here too. Are there other questions?
I don't see any in chat. I don't know if you have any in the audience, Deb. Hands raised.
No questions here either. Michelle, thank you so much. I know
Sure.
we'll
I-
continue to work together on these important issues, especially the one before us, and appreciate all of your work.
Of course, if I can plug one more link that I think Jonah's going to send around. We have a new, newly improved site that we've been working on since 2018, but it got a revamp last year called workelections.com. And in 2020, we partnered with Power the Polls. And it was really the engine behind that effort to make sure that there were sufficient poll workers across the country. And so that site allows anyone across the country to put in their state and figure out how to become a poll worker. So we encourage you to check out that site, send interested friends wherever they are, whether they're in Virginia or across the country to that site to make sure that we have well-staffed polls in the elections coming up.
Yeah, they're in chat already, so we're good.
Well, thank you. And those are all of our speakers. And now what to do with the information that you've heard today. We have Denise Harrington, our advocacy chair, to lead us out.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And just as Deb's just said, we have the charge before us. But you don't even have to look that far. If you pull up your phones, you've been sent 3 very urgent actions to take in your Outreach Circle app, 3 of them. So I'm just going to briefly go through them. And the first one is absentee voting requirement. You know, when you speak about it with the legislator, you should say, mail-in voting requirement, but you can say absentee voting requirement. This removes the witness requirement. I think thanks. Okay, so this removes the witness requirement for absentee voting and replaces it with the requirement. Okay, so can you see me, everybody?
Yes, Denise, we can see you.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Okay, thank you. So it removes the witness requirement for absentee ballots, witness requirement from absentee ballots. So what is the action that we are definitely requesting that you do? And that is to contact the Senate Privileges and Elections Committee to support SB 273. This is Senator Adam Ebbins' bill, and it removes the witness requirement for absentee ballots and replaces it with the requirement that the voter provide the last 4 number of their Social Security and date of birth. Voice your support for SB 273. And some key points: make sure you give your name and or town that you live in, a zip code. One of the reasons that we are supporting this is because, for example, seniors and those living alone, the medically compromised and disabled voters are more likely to have difficulty finding people to witness their ballots. So the witness requirement does not improve security of the ballot or of the election and can be discriminatory to those groups. And if you look on your phone or in your email for the Outreach Circle, you will have all members of that committee. I'll just give them to you a little bit. Senator Creedy is the chair. You have Howell, Vogel, Reeves, Eben, Ruff, Spruill, Peak, McDougall, Surville, Mason, McClellan, Boysko, Bell, and Hackworth. All right, so I'm moving on to the next. And of course, this should probably be this is in your email if you signed up for Outreach Circle. And it's on your phone app. That's what I'm doing right now. And it's very urgent. And so we've already had Richard, Sheba, Claire Castañaga, and a lot of other people come and talk to us about the returning citizens, restoration of returning citizens voting access. Okay. So this provides restoration of returning citizens voting rights. We refer to that because they're no longer felons anymore. They have paid their debt to society. They've served their time and they've paid their debt to society. The actual bill number is 416. That's Delegate Herring's bill. We know she came before us and spoke. And so you voice your support for HB 416. And you can send your comments to the committee. Again, if you have outreach circle, all you have to do is click. And remember pertinent details such as giving your name and your zip code. And so here's a little bit of talk, key points to remember. Returning citizens who have served their time should be able to vote. Voting is an important civic engagement and increases participation in community life. There is bipartisan support. 65% of Virginians support. Let the voters have a say at the ballot box, whether to pass this legislation. So that's that. And the very last one, again, deals with this on the Senate side. This is the amendment, and Senator Locke, Dr. Senator Mamie Locke, again, SJ1. That's SJ1. And you want to voice your support for that. And this is again talking about returning citizens, restoration of voting access, or right to vote constitutional amendment. Make sure you give your name and your zip code and a little few talking points. Again, returning citizens who have served their time should be able to vote. Voting is important, etc. Civic engagement and increases participation in community life. You know, Richard talked about something about decreasing recidivism. And so there is some statistical evidence to suggest that if returning citizens have their voting rights restored, that is also helping them fully integrate into their communities and be productive citizens. And so here are some committee members. Again, the same Senate committee members, but make sure, okay, that's it. That's all. Those are the three that went out. Nope, here's the House bill. That's the one I was really looking for. We definitely have to make sure this gets out of the House Privileges and Elections Committee. And in the House, it's HB 130. And this is Republican member Delegate Cherry. Voice your support for HB 130. And it's for the same reasons. And remember, you know, the League of Women Voters, I just want to say this, we are all over the state. We are in the great Southwest portion. We are in Central Virginia. We are in Tidewater. We're in Eastern Accomack County and Eastern Shore, all over the place. So wherever you are, when you go to the Virginia General Assembly website and you look at, okay, Mary, you might want to, I'm going to put you on mute if I can. I'm just finished.
I am muting people.
Okay, thank you. So the last thing I want to say is this can really, I know a lot of people thought that just because the House changed hands that we didn't have a prayer of a chance. And I just want to remind you all of a few things. You remember, we are issue driven and party blind. Remember that. Issue driven and party blind. And remember, when you go talk to your legislators, our basic mission, educating and empowering voters and defending democracy. And we know democracy works best when everyone is included, including people who have paid their debt to society. So that's all I wanted to say. Look at some of the members on the House P&E committee and make sure if you live in their district, you can also say Delegate X. I am a constituent and I support X, Y, and Z. Thank you so much.
I have a question. What's the difference
There's a few questions here.
between the Harris presenting and the constitutional amendment?
And, okay. Okay, so the question is, what's the difference between Delegate Herring's bill and and Delegate Cherry's bill, correct? There really is not that much of a difference at all. It's none, period. I suspect they will combine the bills and maybe take the lowest number. So it's good if you say, hey, we support X, Y, and Z, both of them. So that's a very good point. Yes, Joan?
Okay, there's a question that says there's a spot on the links for Outreach Circle that include organizations. Should members include LWV or should they not say they are a member of LWV?
I believe if you're supporting one of our approved by the board legislative priorities, I believe it's okay to say that you're a member of LWV, but I think Deb is going to take that one.
So League Day is our day to shine. And so if you're reaching out to people today, it's to focus on our agenda and our legislative priorities. Most of the time when you're responding to the Outreach Circle, you will be speaking as a constituent because legislators want to know that the people that elected them care about these issues. So I hope that helps. It's a little bit murky, but that's the way it works.
We've got a question about SB 273. She says SB 273 seems to have passed with a substitute. Do you know what that substitution is?
Beg your pardon? I'm not sure. I don't know about the substitute.
Yeah. The substitutes are printed in LIS when first they have to be introduced into the committee before they make them available. And so we don't always see them until they go online, even if we're here in person.
I'll check that. Go in the meantime, go if you want to go ahead and ask questions.
I don't see any more in chat. Well, she says she thinks she found the substitute. Okay. I do
great.
not see anything in chat right now, Denise.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. And yay, the league. Let's go. Thank you.
So I think this was a very energizing morning. We had a lot of great speakers. Denise has kicked us off and we're ready to go. So get out there, make your contacts with your legislators and let them know these bills are important. And some of them we oppose, but especially the ones that we support. Thank you so much.